Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a massive political earthquake. We're generating an overview of the 1931 national government in Britain. Let's get right into how a moment of severe national crisis forged this completely unlikely alliance, shattered a major political party, and really laid the groundwork for debates we still have today over austerity, coalition politics, and government intervention. The greatest betrayal in the political history of this country. That is future labor leader Clement Attlee absolutely laying into this event. You can just feel the anger there, right? That perfectly sets the stakes for what we're about to explore. We're talking about a prime minister literally turning his back on his own cabinet to join forces with his biggest political rivals. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. Formation of the national government, political fallout and divided opinions, policies to fight the crisis, decisive election victories, and finally, the legacy of the leaders. Section 1. Formation of the national government. Okay, so picture this. It's August 1931. Things are escalating at breakneck speed. Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald heads to the palace, fully expecting to resign because of a massive economic crisis. But the king had already been talking to the other party leaders, and by Monday morning, plot twist, MacDonald agrees to lead a brand new national government made up of all the main parties, and he does this without a single word of heads up to his own labor colleagues. Actually, Philip Snowden, who was right there in the thick of it, suspected MacDonald cooked this whole scheme up just to keep his job as prime minister. But if you look at MacDonald's own notes about his chat with the king, he gives a totally different reason. He basically said the king told him, "I believe you are the only person who can carry the country through." So for MacDonald, this was all about patriotic duty, putting country before party. Section 2. Political fallout and divided opinions. And wow, did opinions divide over this. The country was instantly, violently polarized. On the left, socialist reformer Beatrice Webb wrote that the Labour Party was not defeated, but annihilated. She was terrified capitalists were just going to run the show for the next decade. But then you look at the establishment press, like an editorial in the Times, they were practically throwing a parade. They warmly congratulated the new government's patriotic spirit and praised MacDonald for the courage to break up his own cabinet to save the economy. But for the Labour Party, and I mean practically the entire party turned on him, this wasn't just politics. It felt like deep personal treachery. They watched the man they helped elevate abandon the working class for his own survival. Only 3 of his cabinet members actually stuck with him. The rest had a whole list of accusations. They claimed he needlessly set up the May Committee instead of listening to his own advisors. They said he was disastrously slow to respond to the crisis, that he totally ignored the unions over massive cuts to unemployment benefits, and that instead of resigning with honor, he teamed up with the Conservatives and called an election that absolutely devastated labor. Section 3. Policies to fight the crisis. So, how did they actually tackle this massive depression? Well, starting with finance, it was this wild mix of old-school traditions and totally radical new ideas. On one hand, they tried to strictly balance the budget, but on the other, they took the huge step of completely abandoning the gold standard, and they actively intervened in currency markets to keep the pound stable. At the time, that was literally an economic earthquake. It completely changed how countries handled money during a crisis. But look, balancing that budget came with a brutal human cost. Right in the depths of this crushing depression, they slashed unemployment benefits by a harsh 10%. And they paired that with a really strict means test to tightly control who even got help. They even cut wages for public employees. It was a really, really bitter pill for the working class to swallow. Now, on the flip side, they tried to jumpstart the wider economy with some totally different monetary policy. By 1932, they had slashed interest rates down to just 2%. That meant cheap money was suddenly everywhere for borrowers, which was meant to encourage investment and kind of shock the economy back to life. When it came to trade, they went into full protection mode. They created the sterling area, where countries used the pound instead of gold to settle accounts. Then they passed the Import Duties Act in 1932, basically slapping tariffs on imports to shield British industry and farming. They even used the Ottawa Conference to set up an imperial tariff system, giving a pass to the British Empire. They were systematically building walls to protect their own markets. And here's the ironic part. For a government heavily backed by free market conservatives, they got super hands-on with domestic industry. I'm talking direct government intervention. They passed the Special Areas Act of 1934 to send targeted aid to depressed regions. They closed down unprofitable mills with the Cotton Industry Act. They even handed out loans to restart construction on the massive Queen Mary cruise liner. Plus, they set up marketing boards to guarantee prices for farmers. Section 4, Decisive Election Victories. Let's see how the voters reacted. The national government went to the public asking for a doctor's mandate, basically saying, give us a blank check to fix the economy, whatever it takes. And the result? It is staggering, a historic, absolute landslide. The national government snagged 554 seats, leaving the opposition, mostly the completely fractured Labor Party, with just 61. Total domination. And that dominance had staying power. Even 4 years later, in 1935, despite failing to totally resolve the unemployment problem, the coalition was still firmly in charge. The Conservatives were the real powerhouse here, pulling in 432 seats. Now, Labor did start to bounce back from that 1931 trauma, climbing up to 154 seats, but make no mistake, the national government was still running the show. Section 5, the legacy of the leaders. This whole era really comes down to the contrasting legacies of two men. Ramsay MacDonald is often remembered as this complex, tragic pioneer. He proved Labor could actually govern without extremism, and he pushed the idea of consensus politics, country over party. But he also totally shattered his own political movement and didn't really have the economic answers. Then you have Stanley Baldwin, who took over as prime minister before the 1935 election. He was the complete opposite vibe, the steady, pipe-smoking, trustworthy Englishman. He pushed a safety-first approach to keep the nation calm. And honestly, Baldwin's calm, moderate brand of leadership was exactly what a fractured nation craved. He was a master in parliament, totally generous and respectful to his opponents. He held the national government together and successfully navigated massive domestic issues like the 1926 general strike and later the abdication crisis. Why does this matter? Well, while extremist political violence was literally tearing other European countries apart at the time, Baldwin's steady hand arguably saved Britain from going down that same chaotic path. But that same masterly inactivity was heavily criticized too. Right when conservatives felt he was too soft, and the press absolutely hated his safety-first mindset. His lack of economic insight meant he didn't do much to actually fix unemployment. But arguably his fatal blind spot? He was incredibly detached from foreign affairs. He had a really limited understanding of the threats brewing in Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, right up until the brink of global conflict. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with one of the biggest debates in British history. Was the national government a bold, patriotic necessity that held a fragile nation together? Or was it the ultimate betrayal of political principles in the working class? When a massive crisis hits, is a leader's first duty to their party or to their country? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.